The last day of death row inmate Benjamin Cole. What happened in that room? At around 8 p.m., inside a small house in Claremore, Oklahoma, a baby began to cry. Within minutes, that sound would stop forever. There were no witnesses in the room, no cameras, just one man, his 9-month-old daughter, and a moment that would later be dissected in courtrooms for years. What happened next didn't take hours. It didn't even take long enough for anyone else in the house to react. It happened fast. Too fast to stop. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the damage had already been done. And what followed, his actions, the delay, the explanation, would raise questions that never fully went away. This is the story of Benjamin Robert Cole, and how a single moment inside a quiet home turned into one of the most disturbing death row cases in Oklahoma. Benjamin Robert Cole's life did not begin with the crime that put him on death row. Long before that night in Claremore, Oklahoma, his background was already marked by chaos, addiction, and violence. Reports describe a childhood soaked in neglect. Both of his parents struggled with drugs and alcohol. There are claims that his mother used heavily even while pregnant with him. He grew up in deep poverty. He and his siblings were allegedly abused in almost every way a child can be abused: physically, psychologically, and sexually. By the time he was old enough to understand the world around him, that world had already taught him pain, instability, and disorder. Those early years did not lead him towards stability. They led him deeper into damage. Cole reportedly began drinking when he was still a child. Later accounts describe him as suffering from paranoid schizophrenia from his teen years forward. At different points in his 20s, he was said to be homeless, addicted to drugs, and disconnected from any stable life. Yet there were also periods where he seemed to function within structure. At one point, he served in the Air Force, which raises difficult questions about how his mental state was evaluated during those years. But whatever brief order may have existed in his life, it did not erase what had already been set in motion. And one detail from his past stands out with chilling clarity. In 1984, at just 18 years old, Benjamin Cole was convicted in California for aggravated abuse of his 6-month-old son. The injuries were severe: a cigarette burn to the eyelid, bruises to the head, more bruises across the torso and limbs, bruising to the genitals, a broken ankle. It was not a minor incident. It was not a misunderstanding. He served jail time for it. Years later, when another infant in his care would die violently, that earlier conviction would stop looking like background information and start looking like a warning no one fully acted on. By December 2002, Cole was 37 years old and living in Claremore, Oklahoma, with his wife, Susan Young, and their 9-month-old daughter, Brianna. Susan is listed in court records as Native American, and the family home sat on land within the Cherokee Nation reservation, which would later raise jurisdictional questions. But on the day Brianna died, none of those legal issues mattered yet. It was simply a quiet evening inside an ordinary house. Cole was in one room playing video games. Susan was doing laundry and other chores around the house. And Brianna was in a crib in another room. At some point, she began to cry. That should have been an ordinary moment. Babies cry. They cry when they are hungry, uncomfortable, tired, frightened, or just in need of comfort. In most homes, it is a call for care. In that house, on that night, it became something else. According to Cole's own later statement, Brianna's crying became loud enough that it interfered with his video game. He paused the game and went into the room. What happened next would become the center of the case, and it would come mostly from his own confession and the medical evidence that followed. Cole told investigators that Brianna was lying on her stomach and that he wanted to flip her over onto her back. He claimed he thought that might calm her down. So he grabbed her by the ankles, and then he pulled. Not gently, not carefully, not in the ordinary way a parent would reposition a baby. He pulled her legs up and back toward the back of her head, and he kept pulling until, in his words, she flipped over. But halfway through that movement, the child's body would have already been folded in a way no infant's body is meant to be folded. The force required was extreme. The medical examiner later testified that this was not accidental force, not minimal force, but tremendous deliberate force. Brianna stopped crying, but not because she had been soothed, because she was dying. The medical examiner would later explain the injury in devastatingly clinical terms. Brianna's aorta, the major artery carrying blood from the heart, had been stretched until it tore completely in two. The examiner said this kind of injury would require immense force. He described it as basically folding the back in half. It was not the result of an accident. It was not something a child could do to herself. It was not a tragic miscalculation. It was violent trauma. And then came the part that made the case even harder to hear. After doing that, Cole walked back into the other room and resumed playing video games. By his own admission, he played 2 more games. While his infant daughter lay nearby with a catastrophic internal injury that, according to the medical testimony, would have killed her within minutes. Eventually, Susan went to check on Brianna and called out to him that something was wrong. He went into the room, looked at the baby, and told his wife the child looked fine. Then he went away again. More time passed. Susan checked again. This time, Brianna had turned blue. Foam was coming from her mouth. The signs were now impossible to dismiss. Only then did Cole tell Susan to call 911. Emergency responders arrived and found Cole attempting CPR, but by then, there was nothing to save. Despite later claims from some anti-death penalty sources suggesting the child died after reaching the hospital, the case file and the medical examiner's testimony made the timeline clear. Brianna would have died within minutes of sustaining the injury. The fatal damage had already been done long before help was called. The distance to medical help made the delay even more disturbing. The family lived about a block away from a hospital. Help was physically close, but the call did not come until after critical minutes had passed, minutes in which Cole returned to his game, then dismissed his wife's first warning that something was terribly wrong. That delay also affected Susan Young's fate. She was eventually charged with child abuse and with failing to seek immediate medical attention. She served 13 years in prison and was released in 2017. Her case became its own painful argument about neglect, awareness, and responsibility. But for Benjamin Cole, the focus remained on the act itself, the violence, the force, the confession, and the fact that this was not the first infant in his care to suffer terrible injuries. At trial, the prosecution had a brutally clear case. Cole's own statements established what he did. The medical examiner established that the force was deliberate and massive. His prior conviction from 1984 established that this was not an unthinkable one-time collapse by a man with no history. It showed a pattern, separated by years, yes, but still impossible to ignore. Once again, an infant under his control had ended up with devastating injuries. The jury convicted him. He was sentenced to death. After that, the case entered the long, familiar machinery of death row appeals. Over the years, Cole's defense team argued that he suffered from severe mental illness, including paranoid schizophrenia and brain damage. They pointed to his childhood. They pointed to his addiction. They pointed to the abuse, the poverty, the psychological collapse, the disorder that they said shaped his life long before he ever became a father. Those arguments were not invented. His life was damaged. His background was brutal. But the courts repeatedly concluded that those facts did not erase the act, and they did not outweigh the evidence showing what happened on December 20th, 2002. The injury itself, the force required, the time that passed after it happened, and Cole's own behavior afterward all worked against him. At one clemency hearing, the issue of his mental state returned once again. His lawyers argued he was deeply mentally ill and deteriorated, but the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 4-1 against clemency. In his final 24 hours, the routine was quiet, controlled, almost clinical. Guards moved him through the same corridors he had walked for years, but this time, there was no next step waiting beyond the schedule. Meals were served, papers were signed, final checks, final protocols, everything measured down to the minute. Some inmates grow restless at the end, others withdraw. Cole remained subdued. There were no dramatic scenes, no last-minute reversals, just the steady approach of a moment everyone knew was coming. Somewhere in those final hours, the case that had followed him for 2 decades narrowed into a single outcome. A room, a procedure, a time. And then it was over. For the system, it marked the end of a sentence. But for those who remember what happened inside that house years earlier, The story had already ended long before that final day ever began.